Hello, my name is Marisol Rubio. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the San Francisco Bay Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I am at IBEW 595 in Dublin and have the privilege and pleasure of being joined today by Liz Ortega, who is running for Assembly District 20. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Like us, we're very excited to have you here today. We have lots of questions lined up for you, and we hope to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas with the community.
Sounds good.
Would love to learn a little bit about what brought you to this forum. Frank, what made you want to step up and run for assembly?
So thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your members. I grew up in the Bay Area. I grew up in this district from the time my parents came to this country. My mother brought me when I was 3 years old. I risked her life in search of the American dream, and I've always believed in that dream. And so when the opportunity came to serve at a higher level within this district, I decided that it was my time to step up for the community that I've always represented. Whether it was through my personal life, volunteering, my husband serving on our school board in San Leandro, or within my day job where I'm currently the executive secretary treasurer of the Alameda Labor Council, representing 135,000 workers, and where I have the honor of being the first Latina to ever be elected to this seat. And that's why I decided that I wanted to take the service that I have provided through the many years of growing up here, living here, working here, and take it to Sacramento to serve all of California.
That's wonderful. And so you mentioned, do you feel that there were any childhood experiences or anything growing up as an immigrant, family of your parents were obviously immigrated here, so as a child, a product of that, growing up in an immigrant family, were there any distinct challenges or things that you feel shaped your worldview?
Yes. I learned to speak English by the time I was 5 years old. I learned by watching General Hospital and All My Children.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got to kindergarten, I knew all about the characters, and I got really good at translating. And so by the time, in elementary school, by the time I was 7, my mom and dad would take me to interview at the doctor's office, would go to the job interviews, anything that needed to be translated, I was the person that did it. I got so good at it that I would come home from school and my mom would find neighbors who needed help, or people she met at the bus stop who needed someone to translate a document for them, and they'd be waiting for me when I got home from school. And I remember as a 9-year-old, I would be mad at my mom because I wanted to go play. But today, I know that was an asset because it served me. It taught me very early on that I had an opportunity to serve, and I've always done it. But it also showed me the income inequality that a lot of immigrant families face when they don't have the English or the language, and they don't understand, but they're doing their best to provide a better future for themselves and their families. And so that's what I saw growing up. I saw a lot of service to our community, but I also saw a lot of income inequality and challenges. And I've always fought to make sure that, we all had an opportunity to live that dream that my parents came here for.
Absolutely. And I guess you could say you were already doing public service.
Yes.
So we're going to sort of take a dive a little bit now into the issues. And in terms of healthcare, I think we can all agree that the pandemic itself truly exposed how those healthcare disparities can acutely impact us. What are some, and also, what do you think about the idea of having universal healthcare? And if you feel that you support that, what are how do you feel are some ideas or ways that we can consider implementing that?
I definitely support universal health care. I'm not a nurse, but I was endorsed by the California Nurses Association. I've also been endorsed by doctors and dentists, all who believe that, healthcare is something that we should all have access to. How are we going to get there? It's a very complicated system. having spent time working on the Alameda health system recently, through the pandemic and the structure of it, I've learned a lot about what a complicated, just within our county, a healthcare system really is. So in order for us to get to universal healthcare, we're going to need a lot of different people at the table to figure out a way to expand the healthcare services and then actually pay for it. And I know that there's a lot of talk about folks not wanting to, pay more taxes or pay additional fees to the state to provide healthcare. But what I like to say to those people is that we're already paying for those things. The number one reason people file for bankruptcy is because they don't have insurance. Right now, the copays are so high that most people would rather not go to the doctor, stay home, because they can't afford a copay. Right now, with the gas prices, do I go to the doctor and pay that very, very high copay, or do I use that money to put gas in my car to get to work? Those are the kinds of choices people are having to make. And they shouldn't have to make. If we've learned anything from this pandemic is that our health impacts everything and everyone around us. Therefore, we should make it a priority to make sure that everyone has access to doctors and medicine and everything they need to live a quality life here in California.
And what are some of the ideas you think we can do to make sure that if we are able to achieve some form of universal health care, that it's quality, affordable, and accessible in a timely manner type of health care? Because I know those are some of the things that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I think I would work with our current chair, Ash Carla, who carried the bill, AB 1400, that didn't make it to the floor for a vote. There was, several holes within that bill that a lot of it had to do with cost and how people are going to pay for it. So he's also endorsed me because he knows that I'm going to be a partner that's going to sit down with him and other stakeholders to talk about those ideas. Where do we go from here? What are the holes that we're missing and how do we fill them? Most importantly, because it's always going to come down to cost, how do we make sure that we address the cost issue, but also make it affordable, accessible, and in a timely manner? Other countries have done it. In the wealthiest country in the world, we have the 5th largest economy just here in California. I think there is a way to figure this out, and we just have to work towards it together.
And certainly statistically it's showing that our quality of service is actually not on par with those internationally, and we're paying substantially more. So something is not working there, clearly. Yes. So appreciate your answer. So speaking about reimagining public safety, what are some of the ideas that you have about how we can improve the relationship that is currently existing between police and especially communities of color, and also therein within schools? Do you believe that police presence should be in schools at any point in time?
I believe in public safety because I believe everyone deserves the right to feel safe. Whether you're walking your dog or you're taking your kid to school or going to the grocery store, everyone should have that right to feel safe. But I also, as we saw as a country, none of us want to see another George Floyd situation. Police officers are not above the law, just like we're not above the law. So I think there has to be a balance between holding people accountable and funding our police officers accordingly, and then thinking about other ways in which we could do public service without having armed officers always there, so that those armed officers have the time and the resources to address the needs of our community when it needs to happen. For example, if there's a serious crime, you call 911, I want that officer to come right away. But if it's, someone who has mental health issues or substance abuse, armed police officer isn't always the best answer. So one thing that I have worked on and want to see more of is these programs where we hire, mental health specialists to work with the police department, to work with the fire department, and to be able to respond to situations like those. For years, we've defunded our mental health facilities. So we need to figure out other ways to think about public safety that's not always, arresting someone and putting them in jail, because obviously that has not worked. And so I want to be able to support our police officers and law enforcement, make sure they have what they need to enforce the law. But I also want to be able to hold them accountable, because police officers are also, they're not above the law. And then invest in other opportunities or education.
Well, thank you for your response in terms of some of the ideas of how we can change that dynamic, the relationship between our law enforcement as well as the community, in particular communities of color. One of the things I've been wondering, what are some ideas you have in terms as well of what can we provide to law enforcement in terms of training, education, support, to make sure that one, they are well-suited and prepared to deal with a very high-stress, high-demand type of environment, and two, that they're in the position to continue to do their work at any given point.
Yeah, I think one thing that most people don't know about me is that I actually got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And the reason I got it was because growing up, I had seen I saw a lot of both sides. I saw a lot of my friends and family members end up in jail or in prison or dead. And I also had a lot of friends who I grew up with that were officers. So I decided to take that route in terms of my education, because I wanted to be that person that actually brought those two worlds together, because I really believe that there can be a way for our community to be safe, but for people of color not to be afraid to call the police. And one of those ways or ideas that I have that's not that far off is, in addition to adding mental health professionals to assist police officers in some of these calls, there's ways for us to improve our recruitment program to make sure that we recruit from our own community, so we have police officers that look like the community that they're there securing and protecting, and making sure that those officers are on the ground talking to our small businesses, talking to, the church or the grandmas that go pick up their kids from school, so that there is that trust that gets built along the way. But at the same time, making sure that they have the resources they need as officers to be able to respond when crimes do occur, and we need them to be able to come fast and deal with whatever the situation is, which is what our 911 system was set up for. And so I think investing in, more support for our police officers in their training, more in the recruitment process, making sure that there's support for them once they get into the community to make sure they're successful, and then working with the entire department, because it can't just be police officer by police officer. It has to be an entire culture that needs to be addressed and worked with.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a community effort. Correct. So in terms of we're going to shift a little bit to education, but not totally off topic yet. But when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, what are some of the things or ideas you have about how we can address that within the school system?
I've always been a proud supporter of public schools. I went to public schools. My kids went to public schools. And I've been endorsed by the teachers of Assembly District 20. And the ideas that I have to making sure that we're a top-notch educational system is making sure that our teachers and our classified employees have the resources they need to be able to educate our kids. Right now, as we've heard, class sizes are too big. Teachers are spending their own money to buy supplies. A lot of our schools need a lot of restructuring or construction. During the pandemic, I heard a lot of parents be more grateful for teachers and their services, but unfortunately, those wages don't match our gratitude. So we need to also look at the wages that we're providing for our teachers. In addition to that, housing, we'll get to housing later, but many of our teachers don't want to go into teaching or they leave because they just don't make enough to live in the community, and they're having to, with master's degree, having to rent a 1-bedroom and have roommates. That should not be happening. And so I think approaching our educational system by making sure that, class sizes stay small, teachers are paid a wage that represents their status in this community, and making sure that, our youth feel, the opportunity to reach for higher education, whether it's community college, whether it's a UC, or maybe even an apprenticeship program. Those are all things that I want to make sure we look into.
And what are your thoughts in terms of charter schools, and what do you think we can do in terms of that relationship between charter schools and public schools, and also therein to ensure that high need students are getting the education and other support that they need within this educational system?
I've always, and I've been on record as saying this as a labor leader, but also as a community member, I oppose charter schools. We've seen data that says that a lot of those that implemented these charter schools were doing it to fill in that hole that wasn't being filled by our public schools, but that's not happening. What is happening is that they're taking resources away from our public schools, and they're excluding kids from being able to attend those charter schools, whether it's a kid with disabilities or comes from a different economic background. They're being excluded from that opportunity. And so I wouldn't support more charter schools, and I would support more accountability for those charter schools that are already in place, using public dollars to teach our kids.
Absolutely. And transparency was another issue, and I think disproportionate enrollment rates
Correct.
for high need
Yes.
students, of course. So absolutely. In terms of, we're going to move on to the environment. We have aspirations of getting to net zero carbon emissions by 2030, and as you know, it's a very complicated issue that requires a lot of stakeholders and a lot of considerations along the way. So what are your thoughts about how we can achieve that in a socially responsible manner?
I think we can achieve that in a responsible manner by, there's a lot of different ways in which we can do it. I mean, we live in California, where we're lucky, where our governor actually believes in climate change, and we have some of the strongest climate change laws in place that lead the way for the rest of the country and the world to take a look at what we're doing here in California. IBW 595 actually has a net zero building in San Leandro in Assembly District 20 that was one of its first of its kind. And so we're making great progress, but it's not enough. As we've seen with the fire danger that comes every year, earlier and earlier, the heat waves, every time we have a storm, we have floods. So there's a lot of work still need to be done. I would definitely like to focus on a lot of the infrastructure. We have a lot of needs if we're going to meet the net zero goals in terms of the gas emissions. Right now, there's not enough charging stations for electric vehicles. We're going to have to do a lot of investing and making sure that there is charging stations in communities of color. Right now in my district, I can probably count the number of places that have charging stations in one hand, maybe two hands, and that's not enough. If we're going to meet this goal, we really have to work a lot faster. In addition to that, I want to work on making sure we hold polluters accountable, because while we're trying to make sure that we meet all these goals to keep our planet alive, there's a lot of bad actors that are still polluting our communities, whether it's our air, whether it's the water. There's still a lot to be done, and I want to make sure that I'm the one that holds those folks accountable. I have a track record of doing that. Recently, there was a corporation that was trying to come into my district where they were going to have idling trucks. We are already surrounded by 3 different freeways. We don't need another segue of idling trucks with all this gas emissions polluting mostly communities of color. And so I fought really hard against that development, not because I'm against development, but I'm against polluters, and I want to hold them accountable to the communities that I'm going to be representing. And so that's an area that I plan to really work hard on.
And what do you think are the opportunities that we can potentially bring into the fold in terms of workers and bringing them into helping us develop this new infrastructure? You mentioned the infrastructure bill. Obviously, this is a very important opportunity to try to truly make this happen with the ambitious goals that we have. How can we bring labor into this in terms of they're a very important stakeholder in this matter. So how can we bring them in and tie them into this effort?
Well, making sure, again, we train the next generation of workers. This is where our educational system comes into play, where we can make sure we bring apprenticeship programs back into the high schools. We used to have mechanics or wood shop. Now it's time to bring these, new jobs of the new era into our high schools to make sure we have the new workforce. We also have an opportunity to make sure that, all this new electrical world that we're in, solar, that we have, bring labor into the discussion as part of the conversation, not after. Because we also want to make sure that we have safe and trained workers to be able to do the work. We don't want to have someone installing a solar panel falling off a roof because they weren't training properly, because we want to reach these environmental goals. We, as a labor or union leader, I want to make sure that, yes, we save the world and we save our planet for the next generation to come, but I also want to make sure that workers are safe, that workers make a good wage, and that, they shouldn't have to worry about their health or falling off a roof while protecting the rest of us. So protections have to be part of that conversation.
Safety, absolutely agree. So in terms of talking of, we're gonna, the pandemic put a lot of strain on small businesses, and as you know, a lot of Latinas are small business owners. We're the largest minority group to be business owners in the United States, and so I'm wondering, what are some of the ideas you have in mind, and how you're going to potentially help these small businesses as they're coming out of this pandemic and have evidently experienced some very acute hardships? How can we help them stay afloat during this time?
Sí, yo hablo español. Y durante la pandemia, muchos de los negocios que están en mi distrito me estaban hablando a mí, pidiéndome ayuda. No sabían qué hacer porque nuestro gobierno cada día estaba cambiando las reglas. Primero no podíamos abrir, y luego cerramos, y luego podemos abrir con las puertas abiertas o las ventanas. Y ellos no sabían qué hacer con sus trabajadores. Tampoco no sabían qué hacer cuando el gobierno anunciaba que iba a haber ayuda para nuestros negocios, y muchos de ellos no podían llenar los papeles o tenían miedo, no sabía que si los tenían que pagar para atrás. No había nadie que les explicara el proceso. Y muchos de ellos hasta lloraban porque no sabían qué iban a hacer mientras que estábamos experimentando con la pandemia. So, lo que yo hice fue llamar a nuestros electos en la área para hacer esas preguntas y darles la información. So, cuando yo sea la asamblea, quiero asegurar que tengan los recursos en sus idiomas. no nomás en un idioma, y también tengan una línea donde pueden llamar sentirse seguros. Me dio mucho coraje ver que muchos de estos dineros que eran para ayudar a nuestra comunidad latina y nuestros negocios ¿cómo se dice? Small businesses, negocios pequeños, casi no recibieron ese dinero y mucho de ese dinero fue a corporaciones muy grandes y ellos no recibieron esa ayuda. So yo quiero asegurar que tengan, porque ellos también tienen el derecho a esa ayuda. So quiero asegurar que entiendan el proceso de cómo abrir un negocio, entiendan los recursos que hay, ya que están abiertos, qué es lo que cómo pueden recaudar para permisos, para, con quién necesitan hablar, y también que no tengan miedo de que algo les va a pasar a su negocio si piden ayuda. Eso es lo que quiero hacer como la próxima y la primera latina. Si gano, cuando gane, voy a ser la primera latina elegida para hacer la asamblea del Distrito 20.
Ah, sí, cierto. Y entonces, lo traducimos en un momento en inglés, pero entonces, lo principal es que ser dueño de un negocio pequeño es bien complejo y hay falta de información y acceso, ¿no? Que es un obstáculo para la mayoría de dueños que ahora están durante y después de esta pandemia no sabían qué hacer. Entonces estoy de acuerdo y agradezco que usted está considerando esas opciones y de verdad en varios idiomas porque muchos negociantes esto es como el modo que ellos especialmente para los inmigrantes, cuando vienen, es un modo de como tener más ganancias, ¿no? En los Estados Unidos.
Sí.
¿Quieres decirlo en inglés?
Yes. So the small business community was extremely challenged during the pandemic. So several of the ways that I want to help is by making sure that our small businesses recover in a way that's equitable. And what I mean by that is that they have access to the information in various different languages, making sure that they understand the different requirements that go into either opening or keeping a small business. That they have access and feel like they have access to the resources that are available to them. Many of our small businesses, most of them immigrant people of color, didn't know that they could access those funds. And if they didn't know a little bit, they were afraid because they didn't know if it was going to have, if they had to return the money or if other implications were involved. And so I want to make sure that they feel like they are part of the business community and they have the same resources to what our government and the state of California has to offer them.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and alongside, on top of all things, as we're coming out of this pandemic, we're also experiencing, as we all know, a very stark inflation rate increase on goods, gas prices. Meanwhile, wages haven't truly risen up to par in parallel, basically, with this inflation rising. So what are your thoughts on that? What should we do or what can we do?
I was happy to see that the governor has increased the minimum wage in California by 50 cents. 50 cents can go a long way when you're struggling, like many families are currently struggling. But I don't think it's enough. With the inflation prices that we're seeing now, obviously I would like to see, wages increase, particularly within those corporations that can afford it.
So I'm glad to hear that the governor is already taking an initiative to try to increase the wages on some level. And I'm hoping that he will continue to push that marker a little further because evidently the cost of living overall is going up across California. And so thinking about that, what are some of the, in terms of like the American dream is something that we've all talked about, and you talked about it when you talked about your family coming here. But it seems that more and more, the wealth income gap is just getting wider and wider. And for a large proportion of residents, it's becoming less of a reality to be a homeowner, to be able to live in a safe community, take their children to a good school. What can we do? What can we do to revitalize, frankly, that dream?
I think, I mentioned the California is the fifth largest economy in the world. We have some of the wealthiest billionaires living here in our state. I do think it's time for us to just take a look at restructuring our taxing system so that, a teacher who's not making enough doesn't pay the same amount of taxes as someone who's able to send themselves to space. There's just a big difference in terms of how much people are bringing home. And so I would really like to look at our tax structure. And, I also want to make sure that the tax structure that we have in place is fair to the small business community. Because having worked with the chamber in different parts of the Bay, I can tell you that some of the largest corporations are paying almost as much as the small mom and pop shops in taxes, and that's just not fair. And so we need to figure out a balanced approach to make sure that everyone gets a fair share to reach the American dream.
And in terms of wages specifically, the Fight for 20, as you know, I'm a home care provider, so I understand, home care providers were very essential during the pandemic, but yet they're amongst the lowest paid workers, and we're not alone in this capacity. There's a lot of workers who are underpaid for the essential work that they do. So do you agree with the Fight for 20? And if so, by when? And how can we achieve that?
Absolutely, we can achieve it I absolutely support that. Again, I've always supported increasing the minimum wage as something that I've fought for the last 20 years. And I don't support, there's different, I do support it. I believe in the Fight for 20. I think it's long overdue. I think essential workers who never saw themselves as essential, should be rewarded with decent wages. If you're going to care for some of our most fragile community members in our area, then you should be paid for that work. Whether you're a home care worker or a teacher or even a fast food employee that we were all calling heroes, everyone should have an opportunity to access decent wages.
Absolutely. And so, housing, big problem in California. So, what bills in particular are you supporting, or do you feel are hoping will pass, and would you support going forward? And what bills would you introduce that you feel haven't been introduced and are missing in order to address the housing crisis?
I know that there's a constitutional amendment that I believe Assemblymember Buffy Wicks has that talks about fast tracking or setting aside a certain amount of money from our general fund to have a loan program so that public service employees or others can afford to take out low interest loans to be able to purchase a home someday. And so that's the kind of program that I would support and would like to see more of, particularly, and when it comes to teachers, nurses, firefighters, home care workers, UPS drivers, all these people that we see in our community, no one ever says, I want to rent forever. I've never heard of somebody say, I want to rent for the rest of my life. I have heard, even now, people say, I want to buy a home, but I'll never be able to do that. And I want to be able to work with my colleagues in the Assembly to address the housing crisis, making sure that we're producing the houses that we need to address the fact that we have a growing population. I want to make sure that we have some kind of program in place with our banks to be able to make sure that people can afford to buy a home. But I also want to hold some of these corporations accountable who are buying up entire blocks and renting them out, taking away opportunities from a teacher to come in with a down payment when they're, you can't compete a down payment with someone who's coming in with cash. And so holding some of those corporations accountable to prevent some of those loopholes from happening is those are the kind of bills that I either want to support or introduce myself to address the housing crisis that we're all in.
Absolutely. And in terms of, I'm going to just loop back around a little bit on education, specifically higher education. How can we make it more accessible and affordable for people, young people, and especially non-traditional students who often get caught in the trap between, do I focus on working and providing so that I can keep a roof over my head, or do I go to school full-time when they're not possible oftentimes to make that happen? What are some ideas that you have so that we can be more inclusive to make sure that the communities that really needed the most, the help to go to college, are able to go to college?
Well, I think it starts at the very beginning. It starts with investing in our child care, daycare programs. When we send our kids to school, there's studies that have been done, right, where the education process really starts at home and then continues when they start preschool and pre-K. And so really investing in early education will make sure that it'll give an opportunity for disadvantaged communities to even think about, what's the future going to be like. There's studies that have shown that if you enter pre-K and have those resources available, you do much better in elementary, middle, high school, and and get into college. So investing in that. In addition to that, in the high school, making sure that we have good quality education, small class sizes again, and then access to, community colleges that are out there, knowledge about the university system, knowledge about, apprenticeship programs, because not everyone's going to go right into a 4-year university. Some have to actually, go straight to work when they graduate, but they want higher education. So making sure they get into some of those apprenticeship programs where they can make, up to $200,000 a year without ever having to go to a 4-year university.
Great. And so now we're going to pull back a little bit and just sort of wondering, what are the economic forecasts, in your opinion, for your area, Assembly District 20, in terms of, do you see any correlation between what's happening in terms of, for example, in the Ukraine on a macroeconomic level and what's happening here locally, such as, for example, seeing gas prices rising, all these other things, and inflation that we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I think we're in a place where no one's ever experienced coming out of a global pandemic. So it's really hard to, forecast. I think at the beginning of this, we were all worried that we were going to be in a recession, and we saw unprecedented surplus in our state budget. So it's hard to say, where we're going to be in the next couple of days or months. But in the event that we are in a recession, which will eventually be, it happens. I think my district is resilient and will do well. But at the same time, I want to start working now on protecting the most vulnerable in our community, because usually when we're in a recession, the first things that get cut are access to health care, access to education, access to transportation. And so making sure that all those safety net programs are protected during a recession is definitely going to be a priority for me and as an assembly member.
Absolutely. The economy is always at the heart of a lot of these issues. So, so what are for example, 3 top issues that you will prioritize in your first year as an assembly member.
I think listening to my constituents, the 3 top issues that continue to come up are housing. I want to make sure that I work with Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who's endorsed me, to make sure that we tackle this crisis in a variety of different ways as a state. The second issue I want to focus on is the environment. Another key thing as we continue to see raging fires and flooding, making sure that we have the resources to save our planet and hold those accountable who are polluting our communities. The third thing is education and access to health care. I think they both are together. Again, going through this pandemic, if we didn't have our health, we couldn't go to work. If we couldn't go to work, we couldn't feed our families. So they're all connected, and I want to make sure that I prioritize those things for the district, for my Assembly District 20.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So this is obviously a very competitive race, and so the question to help the voters decide here, what makes you different? Why are you their best choice?
I think I'm the best choice because I have the experience and the track record of delivering. One of the things that I'm most proud of during this pandemic is having worked for grocery workers. We were all going to the grocery store when that was the only thing that was open and available to us at the beginning, and everything else was shut down. I was able to step in there and fight for hazard pay because these were the people that we were calling heroes. And I was able to pass hazard pay in the city of San Leandro, Oakland, Alameda, Berkeley. This is thousands of workers who had money to put in their pockets so that they were also able to feed their families when the rest of us were at home trying to stay safe. I have a track record of fighting, I have a track record of winning, and I have a track record of delivering. That is something that makes me the best candidate to serve Assembly District 20.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we're going to close out. And I was just, cómo los votantes se pueden aprender más sobre usted y cómo se pueden comunicar con usted.
Se pueden comunicar conmigo en la página de la red Ortega for Assembly, Ortega para Assembly. Se llama mi how do you say website?
Su página de web.
Mi página de web se llama Ortega for Assembly. También me pueden encontrar en Facebook, Instagram y Twitter.
¿Quieres dar el enlace? That's your link to your website.
So, www.ortegafораssembly.com.
Muy bien, muy bien. So if voters want to get in touch with you and learn more about you, where do they go and how do they reach you?
They can go to my website, which is www.ortegafораssembly.com. They can also find me on my Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. I like to stay engaged, so send me a message, and I try to get back to you right away. I won't give you my cell phone because my campaign asked me not to, but I have been talking to voters who are still undecided and talking to them on my pages and giving them my number and having these conversations. So I plan to stay engaged and want to talk to everyone who wants to get to know Liz Ortega.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you and learning about you and your race and the hopes and dreams and the vision you have for AD 20. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Marisol.
Likewise. And thank you for joining us today. Have a great day.